The champagne glasses clinked together as laughter filled the expensive Manhattan art gallery. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, casting golden light on paintings worth more than most people earn in a lifetime. Women in designer dresses and men in tailored suits moved through the space like they owned it. And in a way, they did. This was their world, their circle, their kingdom. Victoria stood in the center of it all, holding court like a queen. At 32, she had mastered the art of looking down at people without actually moving her head. Her pearl necklace probably cost more than a car, and she made sure everyone noticed. She had that kind of confidence that comes from never worrying about money, never standing in line at a regular store, never being told no. The brushwork is derivative at best, she said loudly, gesturing at a painting with her champagne glass. The small crowd around her nodded in agreement. They always did. I told the gallery owner last month that modern abstract is finished. Completely finished. But does anyone listen to me? Her friends made sympathetic noises. One woman touched her arm and said, "You have such an eye for these things, Victoria." "It's a gift, really." Victoria smiled. She loved being right. She loved being important. She loved that people in this world knew her name and wanted her opinion. She had built her reputation as an art consultant carefully, connecting wealthy buyers with expensive pieces. And tonight's charity auction preview was exactly where she needed to be seen. The gallery owner, an older man with gray hair and nervous hands, kept glancing at his watch. He seemed distracted, looking toward the entrance every few minutes. Victoria noticed but didn't care. These gallery people were always stressed about something. She was in the middle of explaining why a particular sculpture was overpriced when the gallery door opened. A man walked in, and Victoria's trained eye immediately scanned him from head to toe. Plain jacket, regular jeans, simple sneakers that had definitely seen better days. No designer labels anywhere. No expensive watch. No signs of wealth or importance. Her lips pressed together in disapproval. Who let him in here? The man moved quietly through the gallery, stopping in front of one of the larger paintings. He stood there for a long moment, just looking. His expression was thoughtful, almost peaceful. He seemed genuinely interested in the art, leaning in slightly to study the details. Victoria watched him with growing irritation. This was an exclusive event. Invitation only. The tickets alone cost $5,000, with proceeds going to some charity she couldn't quite remember. This wasn't a place where random people from the street just wandered in. The man moved to another painting, then another. He pulled out his phone at one point and Victoria's jaw tightened. Was he taking pictures? Without permission? How incredibly rude. When he started walking toward the section where she stood with her group, Victoria decided she'd had enough. She wasn't going to let some nobody ruin the atmosphere of this important event. "Excuse me?" she said loudly as he approached. Her voice had that sharp edge that could cut through any conversation. "Can I help you with something?" The man turned to her and smiled politely. "Oh, hello. I was just admiring the collection. That piece over there," he pointed to the painting she'd been discussing earlier. "It has interesting use of negative space." Victoria let out a small laugh that wasn't really a laugh at all. "I see. And are you on the guest list for this evening?" "I had a meeting scheduled," he said simply. "I arrived a bit early." "A meeting," Victoria repeated, looking at her friends with raised eyebrows. They giggled behind their hands. "I'm sure you did. Listen, this is a private event. For serious collectors and industry professionals. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the public museums. The Met has free admission on certain days, I believe." The man's smile faded slightly, but he remained calm. "I understand. I didn't mean to intrude." "Well, you are intruding," Victoria continued, warming to her subject now. She could feel her friends watching, impressed by how she was handling this awkward situation. These previews are for people who actually understand art, people who can afford to participate in tomorrow's auction. Not for... She waved her hand vaguely at his clothes. Casual browsers. A few people nearby had stopped their conversations to watch. Victoria felt powerful, in control. This was her territory, and she was protecting it. Security really should be more careful about who they let through the door, she added, loud enough for the gallery owner to hear across the room. Anyone could just walk in off the street, apparently. The man looked at her for a long moment. His expression wasn't angry, which somehow made Victoria even more irritated. Why wasn't he embarrassed? Why wasn't he apologizing and backing away? My apologies for the confusion, he finally said. His voice was quiet, dignified even. I'll wait outside. He turned and walked toward the exit without another word. No argument, no scene, no drama. Just a quiet exit that should have felt like a victory. Victoria turned back to her group with a satisfied smile. Honestly, the security at these events gets worse every year. Can you imagine if he'd actually tried to bid on something tomorrow? Her friends laughed right on cue. One man said, "You handled that perfectly, Victoria." Someone had to say something. Well, standards exist for a reason, she said, taking a sip of her champagne. If we let just anyone into these spaces, they lose all meaning. She was about to launch into another story when she noticed the gallery owner rushing toward her. His face had gone completely white, and his hands were shaking slightly. Behind him, his assistant looked like she might cry. "Victoria," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Did you just... Was that man bothering you? The one dressed like he was going to the grocery store?" "Yes, I sent him away. You're welcome, by the way. Your security really needs..." "That was David Huang," the gallery owner interrupted. Victoria blinked. "Who?" "David Huang, the artist. From Seoul." The gallery owner's voice was rising now, panic creeping in. He's only one of the most successful contemporary artists in Asia right now. His last exhibition in Tokyo sold out in 20 minutes. Every piece. We've been trying to convince him to do his first American show here. For 6 months. The champagne glass suddenly felt very heavy in Victoria's hand. "He was supposed to meet with me in 30 minutes, the owner continued. "He always arrives early to spaces. Likes to see them without any pressure, he says. He wants to feel the energy of a place before committing." The man's voice cracked slightly. "Wanted, I should say. Past tense. His manager just called. They're meeting with the gallery across town instead." Victoria's mouth went dry. Around her, the faces of her friends had changed from amused to shocked. Someone behind her whispered, "Oh no." The gallery owner looked at her with something close to despair in his eyes. "Do you have any idea what you've just cost us?" Victoria opened her mouth, but no words came out. Her phone buzzed in her clutch, but she couldn't move to check it. She could only stand there, frozen. As the weight of what she'd done began to sink in like a stone in deep water, the champagne didn't taste quite so sweet anymore. Victoria's apartment had never felt so small, even though it took up half a floor in one of Manhattan's most expensive buildings. She sat on her white leather couch, staring at her laptop screen, watching her entire world collapse in real time. The gallery owner had pulled her into his office right after the incident. The conversation lasted less than 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes changed everything. "Do you understand what David Huang's exhibition would have meant for us?" he'd said, pacing behind his desk. "We're talking about international attention. Press coverage from every major art publication. Collectors flying in from Tokyo, London, Dubai, and now..." He'd stopped pacing and looked at her directly. "Now we're the gallery that insulted him, that treated him like he didn't belong." Victoria had tried to apologize, tried to explain that she didn't know, that it was an honest mistake, but the owner had held up his hand to stop her. "I need you to understand something," he'd said quietly. "David's manager already posted about the incident on social media. Didn't name our gallery, didn't name you, but the art world is small. People know. By tomorrow morning, everyone will know." That had been 3 hours ago. Now sitting in her apartment with a glass of wine she hadn't touched, Victoria scrolled through page after page of search results about David Huang. Each new article made her stomach sink lower. He'd grown up in a tiny apartment in Seoul, sharing one room with his 3 siblings. His father had worked in a factory. His mother cleaned offices at night. David had drawn on scraps of paper, practiced painting on cardboard boxes he'd find behind stores. His first brush set had been a gift from a teacher who'd noticed his talent and saved up for 3 months to buy it for him. At 23, his work had been discovered by a collector who'd seen him painting in a park. Now at 35, his pieces sold for millions. But unlike so many successful artists, David had stayed humble. He donated huge amounts to art programs for poor children. He taught free workshops. He still took the subway instead of hiring drivers. He believes art should be accessible to everyone. One article quoted him saying, "Not just people with money and connections. Real talent exists everywhere, not just in expensive galleries." Victoria closed her laptop and pressed her palms against her eyes. She felt sick. Her phone had been buzzing nonstop since she got home. At first she'd answered, hoping it was someone calling with support or advice. The first call had been from her mother. Victoria Ann Sterling, her mother had said, using her full name the way she only did when deeply disappointed. I just heard from Patricia about what happened at the gallery. Please tell me the story got exaggerated somewhere along the way. Victoria had tried to downplay it, but her mother had cut her off. I raised you better than this. Your grandmother would be ashamed. Treating someone poorly because of how they dressed? That's not who we are. That's not who I taught you to be. The call had ended shortly after, leaving Victoria sitting alone with her mother's disappointment ringing in her ears. The next few calls had been worse. A colleague from another auction house had called to say they were putting on hold their collaboration on an upcoming sale. A gallery in Chelsea had left a voicemail saying they were going with another consultant for their spring exhibition. Each message was polite, professional, but the meaning was clear. Nobody wanted to work with her anymore. Then there was the video. Someone at the gallery had recorded the whole thing. Not the whole conversation, but enough. Enough to hear Victoria's tone, to see her dismissive hand wave, to catch her saying casual browsers with that sneer in her voice. The video was only 20 seconds long, but it captured everything. It had been posted on social media with the caption, "This is what's wrong with the art world." Elitism at its finest. Victoria had watched it once, then couldn't watch it again. Was that really how she sounded? Was that really how she looked at people? The woman in that video seemed like a stranger, cold and cruel and so sure of herself. But it wasn't a stranger. It was her. By midnight, the video had been shared hundreds of times. Art bloggers were writing think pieces about gatekeeping in galleries. People were commenting with their own stories of being made to feel unwelcome in fancy art spaces. Someone had even started a thread about the most elitist things people have experienced in the art world. Victoria's name hadn't been mentioned yet, but it was only a matter of time. She tried calling some of her friends from the gallery event, the ones who'd laughed with her, who'd agreed with everything she said. Surely they would understand it was just a misunderstanding. The first friend didn't answer. The second one picked up but said she had to go almost immediately, something about an emergency with her kids. The third friend was more direct. Look, Victoria, I like you, but I can't be associated with this right now. My husband's company sponsors 3 major galleries. If word gets out that I was standing there laughing while you humiliated David Huang, it could affect his business relationships. I'm sorry, but I need to distance myself from this situation. Click. Dial tone. Victoria set her phone down and walked to her window. The city lights stretched out below her, millions of them, each one representing someone living their life, dealing with their own problems. She wondered how many of those people had ever made someone feel small, how many had judged someone based on appearances and been completely wrong. Her reflection stared back at her from the dark glass. Designer dress, perfect hair, expensive jewelry. She looked successful, put together, important. But standing there alone in her apartment with her career falling apart, she'd never felt more empty. The worst part wasn't even the professional consequences. It was the moment when she'd seen David's face after she'd dismissed him. He hadn't looked angry or offended. He'd looked sad. Like he'd seen this behavior before, like he'd expected it. And that expectation made it somehow worse. She'd made him feel unwelcome in a space dedicated to art. Art, which he'd dedicated his entire life to creating and sharing with the world. And she'd done it because his shoes weren't expensive enough. Victoria's phone lit up with a new notification. An email from a journalist at a major art magazine, requesting an interview for an article about elitism and exclusivity in the contemporary art scene. They wanted her perspective as someone recently involved in a viral incident. She didn't open the email. Instead, she opened her laptop again and searched for more information about David Huang. This time, she wasn't looking at his success or his prices. She was reading about his philosophy, his journey, his reasons for making art. One interview from 2 years ago caught her attention. The interviewer had asked him about dealing with rejection and criticism in the art world. I still remember what it felt like to be told I didn't belong, David had said. When you grow up with nothing, you expect people to look down on you. But it never stops hurting. That's why I try to make sure no young artist ever feels that way in spaces I control. Everyone deserves a chance to be seen. Victoria read that paragraph 3 times. Then she closed her laptop and sat in the dark, listening to the city hum outside her window, wondering if there was any way to undo what she'd done. Her phone buzzed one more time. A text from an unknown number. She almost didn't open it, but something made her look. Community Art Center in Brooklyn needs volunteers for youth program. 9 a.m. Saturday. Come if you want to remember why art matters. No RSVP needed. There was no name attached to the message. No explanation of who sent it or how they got her number. But somehow, Victoria knew exactly who it was from. She stared at that message for a long time, wondering what it meant. Wondering if this was some kind of test or trap or punishment. Or maybe, possibly, it was something else entirely. Something that felt almost like a second chance. Saturday morning came too quickly. Victoria had barely slept all week, and when she did, she dreamed about that moment at the gallery over and over again. Each time she saw David's face more clearly, saw the sadness in his eyes, heard the coldness in her own voice. By Friday afternoon, her professional life had completely unraveled. The gallery had officially terminated her consulting contract. They'd sent a polite email thanking her for her past contributions, but the message was clear. She was done. 3 other clients had followed suit by the end of the day. 20 years of building her reputation, gone in less than a week. The art magazine had published their article. They hadn't used her name, but they'd described the incident in enough detail that everyone in the industry knew exactly who they were talking about. The comments section was brutal. People shared their own experiences with snobbery in art galleries. Others debated whether she deserved a second chance. Most agreed she didn't. Her mother had called once more, briefly, to say that Victoria should take some time to think about the kind of person she wanted to be. Then she'd hung up, leaving Victoria sitting in her apartment surrounded by expensive furniture that suddenly felt meaningless. Now, standing outside a plain brick building in Brooklyn at 8:45 in the morning, Victoria almost turned around and went home. The Community Arts Center looked nothing like the galleries she was used to. No marble steps, no fancy signage, just a simple door with peeling paint and a handwritten poster in the window advertising free art classes for kids. What was she even doing here? But the memory of that text message kept her feet planted on the sidewalk. Someone had reached out to her in the middle of her worst moment. Someone thought she should be here. Maybe it was David, maybe it was someone else. Either way, she'd come this far. Victoria pushed open the door. Inside, the building was warm and chaotic in the best way. Children's artwork covered every wall, bright splashes of color and creativity. Some pieces were technically perfect, others were wild and messy. But all of them were displayed with the same care and pride. The smell of paint and clay filled the air. Somewhere down a hallway she could hear laughter and music. An older woman with paint-stained hands and kind eyes approached her. "Can I help you, dear?" "I received a message about volunteering," Victoria said quietly. "I wasn't sure if I needed to sign up or—" "Oh, wonderful." The woman's face lit up. "We can always use extra hands. I'm Ruth, I coordinate the programs here." "Have you worked with kids before?" Victoria shook her head. "I've worked in art galleries. As a consultant." Ruth didn't react to that, which meant she either didn't know about the scandal or was too polite to mention it. "Well, the kids are just starting to arrive for our Saturday workshop. Maybe you could help set up supplies. We're doing painting today." For the next hour, Victoria found herself doing things she hadn't done in years. Filling cups with water, arranging brushes by size, mixing paint colors, laying out old newspapers on tables to protect them from spills. Simple tasks, humble work, nothing glamorous about any of it. Then the children arrived. They rushed in with energy and excitement, ages ranging from about 7 to 16. Some were shy, others loud and confident. They wore regular clothes, nothing fancy, and they grabbed supplies like they were treasures. Victoria watched a young girl, maybe 10 years old, carefully select her brushes with the same focus Victoria had seen in professional artists. "This is your first time here, right?" The girl looked up at Victoria with curious eyes. "Yes, it is," Victoria admitted. "Are you a good painter?" "I used to think I knew a lot about art," Victoria said slowly. "But I'm starting to realize I forgot some important things along the way." The girl nodded seriously, like this made perfect sense to her. "My teacher says art isn't about being perfect. It's about showing what's inside you, even if it's messy." Something twisted in Victoria's chest. When was the last time she'd thought about art that way? When had she stopped seeing the heart in pieces and started only seeing price tags and investment potential? Ruth appeared beside her. "Can I show you something?" She led Victoria to a small office at the back of the building. The walls were covered with photos of kids working on art projects, smiling with paint on their faces, holding up completed pieces with pride. But what caught Victoria's attention was a framed letter on the desk. This program was fully funded by an anonymous donor 5 years ago, Ruth explained. We were about to close down. Couldn't afford rent, couldn't buy supplies. Then one day, a lawyer showed up with a check and a letter saying that someone wanted to make sure kids in this neighborhood had access to art education. No strings attached, no publicity, just pure generosity. Victoria's throat felt tight. Do you know who it was? Ruth smiled. The donor asked to remain anonymous, but he visits sometimes. Comes in quietly, helps with classes, talks to the kids. He never makes a big deal about it. I think he just likes remembering why he started making art in the first place. She didn't have to say the name. Victoria already knew. He grew up without much, didn't he? Victoria asked quietly. From what I understand, yes. And he never forgot what it felt like to have someone believe in him when he was young. Now he tries to be that person for others. Ruth looked at Victoria carefully. Everyone has a story, dear. Everyone comes from somewhere. We can't always see it by looking at them. The words hit Victoria like a wave. She judged David in seconds, decided he didn't belong, dismissed him without knowing anything about him. And he'd built this place. He'd created opportunities for children who reminded him of himself. While she'd been worried about maintaining exclusivity and status, he'd been opening doors for people who needed them most. I made a terrible mistake, Victoria heard herself saying. The words came out before she could stop them. Last week, I treated someone badly because I thought I was better than them, because of how they dressed. And it turned out he was... She couldn't finish the sentence. Ruth's expression was understanding but not pitying. And now you're here. I don't know why I'm here, Victoria admitted. I got a text message and I came. Maybe you're here to remember something you forgot, Ruth said gently. Or maybe you're here to learn something new. Either way, those kids out there don't care about your mistakes. They just care about whether you'll help them mix the right shade of blue. Through the office window, Victoria could see the young girl from earlier, concentrating hard on her canvas. Her tongue stuck out slightly as she carefully added details to what looked like a garden scene. The girl wasn't worried about whether her technique was perfect or whether her work would sell for thousands of dollars. She was just creating, just expressing, just being present in the moment. When was the last time Victoria had felt that kind of pure connection to art? She turned back to Ruth. What can I do to help? For the rest of the morning, Victoria worked alongside the children. She helped mix colors, offered gentle suggestions when asked, held brushes when little hands needed to wipe paint off their fingers. A teenage boy showed her his piece, a portrait of his grandmother, and asked her opinion. Victoria looked at it, really looked at it, and saw the love and skill in every brushstroke. It's beautiful, she said honestly. You captured something real here. Something that matters. The boy's face lit up. Thanks, I've been working on getting better at faces. It's hard. All the best things are hard, Victoria found herself saying. But you're doing it because you care. That's what makes it art. At noon, as the workshop was winding down, Victoria heard the front door open. She was helping clean brushes at the sink and didn't turn around immediately. But she heard Ruth's voice, warm and welcoming. David, good to see you. We have a new volunteer today. Victoria's hand stopped moving. Her heart started pounding. Slowly, she turned around. David stood in the doorway wearing the same simple style of clothes as before. When his eyes met hers, there was a flicker of recognition but no anger. Just that same calm, thoughtful expression. Hello, he said quietly. Victoria's mouth went dry. This was it. The moment where she had to face what she'd done, face the person she'd hurt, face the truth about who she'd become. Hello, she managed to say back. I owe you an apology. The community center suddenly felt very quiet, even though children were still chattering and cleaning up their art supplies all around them. Victoria could hear her own heartbeat in her ears as she stood there, wet paintbrushes still in her hands, facing the man whose life she'd judged in seconds. David looked at her for a long moment. Then he nodded slightly. Let's talk outside. They walked out to a small courtyard behind the building. It was nothing fancy, just a concrete space with a few benches and some plants in old ceramic pots. Someone had painted a mural on the back wall, bright flowers and birds that brought life to the gray surroundings. Victoria had rehearsed what she wanted to say all week. She'd written down apologies, deleted them, written new ones. But now, standing here, all those careful words disappeared. "I'm sorry," she said, and her voice cracked. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you. There's no excuse for what I did. I was arrogant and cruel, and I judged you based on nothing but appearances. You didn't deserve that. Nobody deserves that." David was quiet for a moment, looking at the mural. "Why did you come here today?" "I got a text message. It told me about this place." Victoria paused. "Was it from you? Does it matter?" Victoria thought about that. "No, I suppose it doesn't. I came because I needed to understand. I needed to see what I'd been missing." "And what have you been missing?" David asked. There was no edge to his voice, no anger. Just genuine curiosity. Victoria looked back through the window at the children inside, packing up their artwork with such care and pride. "Everything that matters," she said quietly. "I spent 20 years in the art world, but somewhere along the way I stopped seeing the art. I only saw prices and prestige and status. I forgot that art is supposed to mean something. I forgot that people matter more than appearances." "It's easy to forget," David said, "especially when you're surrounded by people who value the wrong things." "That's not an excuse." "No, it's not." David finally looked at her directly. "But it's an explanation. I grew up with nothing, Victoria. My family lived in a 2-room apartment. My father worked 16-hour days and still couldn't always pay the bills. I drew on scrap paper because we couldn't afford sketchbooks. And everywhere I went, people looked at me the way you looked at me last week." Victoria felt shame wash over her, hot and uncomfortable. Teachers who didn't believe I could succeed because of where I came from. Gallery owners who wouldn't even look at my portfolio because I showed up in cheap clothes. Collectors who assumed I was there to clean, not to show my work. David's voice remained calm, but Victoria could hear the years of pain behind his words. "I promised myself that if I ever made it, if I ever had any success, I would never make anyone else feel that way." "And I did exactly what you promised yourself you'd never do," Victoria whispered. "Yes, you did." David didn't soften it, didn't make it easier for her. "But you know what's interesting? You're here. Most people who make that kind of mistake just make excuses or pretend it didn't happen. You came to a community center in Brooklyn on a Saturday morning. That says something. It doesn't erase what I did." "No, it doesn't." David sat down on one of the benches. "Nothing can erase it. But maybe that's not the point. Maybe the point is what you do next." Victoria sat down on the other end of the bench, keeping distance between them. "I've lost everything this week. My contracts, my reputation, my relationships. People in the art world won't work with me anymore. And how does that feel?" The question surprised her. Victoria expected him to seem satisfied by her downfall, but his expression was neutral, maybe even sympathetic. "Terrifying," she admitted. "I built my entire identity around that world, around being someone important in those spaces. Without it, I don't know who I am." "Now you know how it feels," David said simply. "To be dismissed. To be made to feel like you don't belong. To have doors closed in your face because someone decided you weren't worth their time." The truth of it hit Victoria hard. She'd gotten a tiny taste of what David had experienced his entire life, and it had destroyed her in less than a week. How had he survived it? How had he kept creating, kept believing in himself, kept his heart open enough to fund places like this? "How do you not hate people like me?" she asked. David was quiet for a long time. Inside, they could hear Ruth calling out goodbye to the children as they left with their parents, their artwork carefully protected in folders and bags. "I did, for a while," he finally said. "When I was younger, I was angry all the time. Angry at people who had opportunities I didn't have. Angry at people who judged me. But anger is exhausting, and it was getting in the way of my art." He gestured at the mural. "One of my students painted that. She's 15. Her family can barely afford food, but she comes here every week because art makes her feel alive. If I'd stayed angry, I couldn't have created this place. I couldn't have helped her." Victoria looked at the mural with new eyes. "It's beautiful." "It is. And she's talented. Really talented. But if she walked into one of those Manhattan galleries in her regular clothes, someone might treat her exactly the way you treated me. They might dismiss her before ever seeing her work. And we'd all lose out on what she could create." The weight of that truth settled on Victoria's shoulders. How many talented people had she dismissed over the years? How many opportunities had she destroyed with her snobbery? How much beauty had she failed to see because she was too busy judging surfaces? I don't expect you to forgive me, Victoria said. I don't even know if I can forgive myself. But I want you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did and why it was wrong, and I'm going to spend a long time trying to figure out how to be better. David nodded. That's all any of us can do. Make mistakes, learn from them, try to be better tomorrow than we were yesterday. The exhibition, Victoria started, then stopped. I know I cost the gallery that opportunity. I know my behavior ruined everything. Is there any chance you'd reconsider? David shook his head. No, that bridge is burned, but not because I'm punishing anyone. Because I can't work with people who don't share my values. That gallery had you as their consultant for years. That tells me something about their priorities. It was fair. Painful but fair. But, David continued, and Victoria looked up in surprise. I've been thinking about doing some smaller shows. More intimate spaces. Places where young artists can show their work alongside established names. Places where the focus is on the art, not the champagne and the social climbing. Victoria wasn't sure what he was suggesting. I'm not offering you anything, David clarified. I'm just telling you what I'm thinking about. If someone wanted to help make something like that happen, someone who understood both worlds and was willing to use their knowledge for something meaningful, instead of something exclusive, that would be interesting. He stood up, preparing to go inside. But that person would have to really change. Not just say they've changed, but actually live it. Show it. Prove it through actions, not words. How long would that take? Victoria asked. David smiled slightly. However long it takes. Change isn't a transaction, Victoria. You don't apologize and then everything goes back to normal. You have to rebuild trust brick by brick. And maybe the person you become in the process is someone different from who you were before. Maybe that's the whole point. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Ruth mentioned you were good with the kids today. You're welcome to come back next Saturday if you want. We can always use help. Then he was gone, leaving Victoria sitting alone in the courtyard with the mural and her thoughts. She sat there for a long time, watching shadows move across the painted flowers as the sun shifted overhead. Something inside her felt different. Lighter maybe, or maybe just empty in a way that left room for something new to grow. Her phone buzzed. Another email from someone in the art world, probably another bridge burning. But for the first time in a week, Victoria didn't rush to check it. Whatever it said, whoever was disappointed in her, it didn't change what she needed to do. She needed to figure out who she wanted to be. Not who she'd been, not who people expected her to be, but who she actually wanted to become, and maybe, just maybe, that journey started right here, in a small community center in Brooklyn, with paint under her fingernails and children's laughter still echoing in her ears. Victoria pulled out her phone and, instead of checking her emails, she set an alarm for next Saturday morning. 9 o'clock. She wouldn't forget. Then she stood up, took one last look at the mural, and headed home with the smallest feeling of something that might eventually become hope. 6 months later, Victoria stood in front of a mirror adjusting a paint-stained apron. Her reflection looked different from the woman who'd stood in that Manhattan gallery half a year ago. Same face, but somehow softer. Her hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail instead of an elaborate style. She wore jeans and a comfortable sweater, clothes meant for working, not impressing. The alarm on her phone went off. Saturday morning, 9 o'clock. Time for the community center. She hadn't missed a single Saturday since that first one. At first, the kids had been curious about the new volunteer who clearly didn't know her way around paint supplies or how to talk to children. But week after week, she showed up. She learned their names, remembered which colors they preferred, asked about their school projects and their lives. Slowly, they'd accepted her. And even more slowly, she'd started to accept herself. The early weeks had been hard. Victoria had sold her luxury apartment and moved to a smaller place in Brooklyn, closer to the center. She'd sold most of her designer clothes, her expensive jewelry, all the things that had once defined her status. The money went partly to living expenses, but mostly to donations for art programs across the city. Her old friends had stopped calling entirely. Her mother had eventually come around, visiting the new apartment with cautious hope in her eyes. You seem different, she'd said, calmer, more like the girl you used to be before all the gallery nonsense. Victoria had hugged her and cried, something she hadn't done in years. The art world had moved on without her. She'd see announcements for exhibitions and auctions, events she would have been at before, and feel a pang of something that wasn't quite regret. more like recognition of a life that no longer fit her. She'd started small, reaching out to young artists she met at the community center and other programs around the city. Not the ones with fancy degrees or connections, but the ones with raw talent and no opportunities. She'd help them photograph their work properly, write artist statements, navigate the confusing world of galleries and grants. She didn't charge them anything. This wasn't about money anymore. One young woman, barely 20, had been selling drawings on the street to help pay for her mother's medical bills. Victoria had seen her work and been stunned by its emotional depth. She'd spent weeks helping the young artist prepare a portfolio, then connected her with a small gallery in Queens that focused on emerging talent. The artist's first show had been modest, nothing like the glamorous Manhattan openings Victoria used to attend. But watching that young woman stand proudly next to her work, watching her mother tear up with pride, Victoria had felt something she hadn't felt in years: purpose, real, meaningful purpose. Now, walking into the community center on this particular Saturday morning, Victoria noticed something different. Ruth was standing at the door with an unusual expression, somewhere between excitement and nervousness. "David wants to see you in the back office," Ruth said quietly. Victoria's heart skipped. She'd seen David most Saturdays over the past 6 months. They'd exchanged polite greetings, sometimes worked together with the kids, but they'd maintained a respectful distance. He'd been watching her, she knew, observing whether her change was real or just performance. She walked to the back office, her hands slightly shaky. David was sitting at the desk, looking at something on a laptop. He glanced up when she entered, closed the door, he said. Victoria did, then stood there awkwardly, unsure whether to sit. "I've been keeping track of what you've been doing," David said without preamble. "The young artists you've been helping, the programs you've donated to, the quiet work you've been doing without posting about it on social media or looking for recognition." Victoria's cheeks flushed. "I wasn't doing it for recognition. I know, that's the point." David turned the laptop toward her. "Do you remember what I said about wanting to do smaller exhibitions? Shows that focus on emerging artists alongside established names? Yes. I'm doing one. 3 months from now. A gallery in Brooklyn agreed to host. It's not fancy, but it's respected. Half the pieces will be from my collection, half from artists who've never had a major show before." He paused. "I need someone to help coordinate it, someone who understands both worlds, someone who's proven they've actually changed." Victoria's breath caught. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you an opportunity to be part of something meaningful. It doesn't pay much. Actually, it barely pays at all. And you won't get your old life back. The Manhattan galleries still won't want you. The fancy auction houses will still avoid your calls. But you'll be helping launch careers for people who actually need it." Tears suddenly blurred Victoria's vision. "Why, after everything I did?" David leaned back in his chair. 6 months ago, you made a mistake based on who you'd become. But these past 6 months, you've shown me who you're choosing to be now. That matters more." He paused. "Also, one of the artists in the show is the young woman you've been mentoring. The one who was selling drawings on the street. She told me what you did for her, how you spent hours helping her, never asking for anything in return, never taking credit for her success." Victoria wiped her eyes. "She's incredibly talented. She deserves every opportunity." "Yes, she does. And so do the 5 other artists we're featuring. Artists from backgrounds like mine. Artists who have something real to say but no platform to say it on." David stood up. "So are you interested?" "Yes," Victoria said without hesitation. "Yes, absolutely." "Good, because we have a lot of work to do and the art world isn't going to make it easy. Some people are already criticizing the show, saying we're being too political, too focused on diversity, not focused enough on commercial appeal." Victoria felt a flicker of her old fire, but different this time. Not arrogance, but conviction. Let them talk. Good art speaks for itself, no matter where it comes from. David smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him. "Now you're getting it." They spent the next 2 hours planning. Victoria took notes, asked questions, offered ideas. She felt energized in a way she hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. This wasn't about making money or building status. This was about giving voice to people who deserved to be heard. As she was leaving, David called her back. "Victoria? One more thing," she turned. "Thank you for doing the work. Real change is hard. Most people never attempt it. You did." Walking home that evening, Victoria passed by her old neighborhood. She could see the expensive restaurants, the luxury boutiques, the people dressed in designer labels hurrying to wherever important people hurry to. She felt no longing for that life. No regret. Instead, she thought about the exhibition, about the young artists who'd finally get their chance, about the walls she'd help break down, the doors she'd help open. Her phone rang. It was the young artist, the one whose work would be featured in the show. "Victoria, I just heard the news. I can't believe this is happening." The girl's voice was shaking with excitement. "I keep thinking I'm going to wake up and it'll all be a dream." "It's real," Victoria assured her. "And you've earned every bit of it. I never would have gotten here without you." Victoria smiled. "You would have. Maybe it would have taken longer, but talent like yours doesn't stay hidden forever. I just helped clear some obstacles." After they hung up, Victoria sat on a bench in a small park. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She thought about that night at the gallery, the moment that had destroyed her old life and forced her to build a new one. The truth was, losing everything had been the best thing that ever happened to her. She'd been living in a beautiful prison of her own making, surrounded by expensive things and empty relationships, measuring worth by price tags and social status. She'd forgotten what mattered. She'd forgotten how to see people as people, not as categories or competitions. David had been right. Arrogance had a price. She'd paid it with her reputation, her career, her social standing, but in losing all of that, she'd found something infinitely more valuable. She'd found purpose. She'd found connection. She'd found out who she really was when all the superficial layers were stripped away. Victoria pulled out her phone and looked at her calendar. Tomorrow, she was meeting with 2 more young artists who needed guidance. Next week, she had calls scheduled with several smaller galleries about future collaborations. The month after that, the exhibition would open. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't the life she'd thought she wanted. It was better. She stood up and headed home, already thinking about the work ahead. There were so many talented people out there who needed someone to believe in them, to open doors, to give them chances, and now, finally, she was ready to be that person. Not because it would make her important or respected or wealthy, but because it was right. Because everyone deserved to be seen for who they really were, not judged by surfaces and assumptions. Because 6 months ago, in the worst moment of her life, someone had given her a second chance. And now it was her turn to pass that gift forward. The city lights began to flicker on as darkness fell. Victoria walked through Brooklyn's streets, past the community center where children's artwork still decorated the windows, past small galleries showcasing work from artists no one had heard of yet, past people living real lives with real struggles and real dreams. She was part of this world now, not above it, not separate from it, but genuinely part of it. And for the first time in longer than she could remember, Victoria felt truly at home.